Hello, everybody, and a very warm welcome to a very special property and investor podcast. This is a podcast where I speak to some of the most interesting, inspiring, resilient people in property investing and beyond. Of course, I'm your host, Paul Lanfear. And normally I give a health warning. I'm still going to give the health warning, but it feels of less direct implications today. But obviously, nothing that me and my guests discuss today is health, legal, financial, or any of that advice. Now, with no further delay, my guest is Wendy Whittaker-Large. Wendy, a very warm welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's great to be here.
It's exciting, isn't it? So this is a very special podcast. We've not done one of these before, but the enormity of recent events, I think, really justifies doing this very special one. So we'll come on to that in a moment. Before we do, Wendy, I'm sure most people listening to you on the podcast have heard of you before, but imagine there is this one straggler who hasn't yet discovered you. Give us your property 60-second CV.
I started investing in property nearly 30 years ago. Oh, it makes me feel so incredibly old. I was just about a toddler when that happened. No, not really. But my very first property was a shared student property. So you could say that my fate, my destiny was started even with the very first property I ever bought. That, however, morphed into a single buy-to-let, and I ended up buying a few single buy-to-lets. I started to explore auction purchasing, and I bought a few properties at auction. I did some flips, and really pursued this alongside my own career in higher education and bringing up a family. Fast forward to 2013. I'm a little bit stuck in my job, feeling like there's not enough time to do everything I needed to do, and there's certainly not enough money to do everything I wanted to do. And with 4 children, 4 boys, there was always more month than money. So I started to invest in HMOs and really seriously invested for about the first 5 years using other people's money. And during that time, I was then able to develop enough income to do commercial conversions, to buy lots of other different types of property. So now I have my own lettings agency, which we set up about 6 years ago because the role of running those HMOs had become a little bit too onerous for me on my own. So we now have a team of people who manage our properties, and we manage HMOs for other people as well. We now have over 200 rooms that we own or manage. We have commercial property, single buy-to-lets, and I've done most of the strategies that you can think of in property. So yeah, that's me. I've written a couple of books about property investing, particularly about HMOs, and I also run a very successful mentoring and training business.
So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. What Wendy doesn't know about HMOs in particular, and indeed property, there probably isn't worth knowing. It's worth noting that both of her books are best-selling books as well. We should probably
both got the best-selling mark on Amazon.
Oh, that's fantastic. So look, Wendy, why are we here? Well, we're here because there's been some very exciting news in the HMO space, and when it came out, I think within the first 5 seconds, I sent you a very quick message saying, Wendy, this is really big, really big. It's I think, one of the most interesting, exciting developments in property in the last decade. So I'm going to shut up now, if that's okay, Wendy, and hand over to you. You tell us what this development is. I mean, a few people would have heard of it already. And give us the headline. What's the big news? How's it come about? Over to you.
The big news is that council tax is no longer going to be able to be applied to individual HMO bedrooms. Now, you may think that this wasn't happening. It was a very rare occurrence, but actually it was becoming more and more prevalent. And I was coming across more and more HMO landlords who had a property where each of the bedrooms, not just the property, not just the house or the building, but each of the bedrooms was being given a council tax bill. And that, as you can imagine, has serious implications in many different directions: profitability, the ability to conduct business, the effect on the tenants, has lots and lots of other ramifications. And we have forced through a bill, actually an amendment to a bill, legislation that amends the Council Tax Dwellings Order 1992 to stop this from ever happening. and to stop the Valuation Office Agency, who's responsible for this, from being able to do this anymore. So from now on, the line has been drawn in the sand. This can never happen moving forward from the 1st of December. It actually gets enacted on the 1st of December, 2023, that any HMO from that point forward, the rooms cannot be individually banded for council tax.
Excellent.
And I agree with you. I think it is a historic moment for many different reasons. One of which is that the voice of the landlord, the little old landlord, has been heard. The government has decided to listen to us landlords and realize that we have something to say and that we are not going to give up on a fight. And while this is what I've always said, it's a niche area within a niche part of a niche industry. And many people misunderstand the private rental sector. They have views about it, they're biased against it, you know, greedy landlords, we hear about them all the time, but actually, of course, they provide an incredibly important aspect of our economy. You simply would not have the economic structures that we've got had we not got houses for people to rent. And we know HMO rooms are an incredibly valuable part of that housing economy. So being able to protect those HMO rooms from having additional taxation levied on them, which was, by the way, being done inconsistently, it was being done very sporadically in some areas, and it was, I would say, discriminatory as well, because you might have a street where you had 4 HMOs. 2 of the HMOs have been rebanded for council tax, so all the rooms are now liable for having a council tax bill. And the other 2 HMOs in the street got away with it scot-free. To me, that is not the way you run a taxation system or have a business policy. And so that's why we had to go about changing it. And we have changed it. And it really is truly historic for the landlord community, I believe.
Well, so the first thing to say is huge congratulations to you, Wendy, because you've really led this charge, and you know, having been tracking it for what seems like years almost. I don't know how long you've been at it. You know, there's been lots of highs and lows on the way. There's been, we've had moments where it looked like there was going to be some early wins, and then there's suddenly the world became a different place and other things took over the agenda. So firstly, thank you very much, Wendy, for all of your efforts on this, and indeed the people, supporting you behind the scenes. For those that like the detail, there's a statutory instrument. It's number 1175, Council Tax England. So if you want the detail of it, that's where you'll have to go to. So that's fantastic. So firstly, this is really, really good news, and the headline being no individual council tax banding, and you've successfully led this charge. And as you say, it's really good, really positive to have some good news, isn't it? In a landscape which is, let's be honest, really pretty bleak right now, and if we take that down to the property sector, a sector which has had, its fair share of negative news. Although, as we were saying before the podcast, I wonder if this is the beginning, Wendy, whether this is now a course correction, where those in power are beginning to get a hint of the value of the private rental sector. But let's not get too over our skis too early doors. So so now we've got the headline out of the way, I think people will be interested to learn, how did this come about? So what was how did this end up on your desk? What on earth possessed you, a busy woman, with multiple businesses and a family and a life, to take on this enormous undertaking? So how did how did you get into this, and what was your reason for leading the charge?
Well, the way it started was that I was working with a client, a mentoring client, who was developing HMOs up in Wakefield. And he had warned me that one of his friends who had an HMO had said, if you put en suites in the rooms will be individually banded for council tax. And I thought, that can't be right. No, that's ridiculous. How could an ensuite make a difference to a room? That can't be right. And of course, as I subsequently found out, actually, it didn't matter whether it had an ensuite or it didn't. In some areas, that house could still be rebanded. In fact, it didn't matter whether it was a licensed HMO or not. In some cases, we've had 4-bedroom, non-ensuite HMOs be individually banded for council tax. So all those things about en-suites, not en-suites, locks on doors, don't put locks on doors, I began to get into the kind of nuts and bolts of what was going on. And where was this happening? And it was this one client, the first client that alerted me to this, that piqued my interest. And he developed a 6-bed HMO with en suites. And lo and behold, guess what happened? He got a letter from the valuation office agency saying, "Dear Mr. XXX, I'm sorry to tell you, but well, in fact, I don't think they were sorry at all, but I'm here to tell you that your HMO, each of the rooms is going to have its own council tax band." Now, he and I were obviously very perturbed by this and decided that we would launch our own little campaign to get it overturned. And we wrote letters and we formulated an argument, and I started to look into the legal side of it as well and to understand where this was coming from. And so I did a lot of research on the Valuation Office Agency website. I read all their documentation, all their policy documents. I read into the case law. I read into the other cases that have gone to tribunals. I read about high court cases. And I began to piece together the story of what had gone on and how he had ended up with his property being rebanded. As I was doing this, of course, I was learning masses. And this is the one thing that I found out, really, being a property entrepreneur, is that property touches so many different aspects of life. There's money. Now, of course, there's cash flow, there's profit and loss, there's understanding what an asset is, what a liability is. But actually, it's an economy. And as you begin to invest in property, you also learn about how the national economy, the international economy affects you. For example, take interest rates. Nobody would be unaware of the changes in interest rates over the last 3 years, unless you've had your head in the sand, and the impacts that's had. Inflation, of course, that's another one that, nobody could be unaware of, that this has had a massive impact on property prices, rental values, and so on. And the private rental sector sits within all of those different sort of spheres of activity. Now, the other one, of course, is the law. I don't have a legal background, unlike you, Paul. You're a legal expert, although I'm married to somebody who does have a law degree. So we do discuss things to do with legislation and regulation and so on. And obviously nowadays, being a landlord, again, you cannot be ignorant about pieces of the law. You have to learn about it. So property actually exposes you to a number of different subject areas that you might not have ever learned about in another lifetime. But I find it incredibly interesting. So I delved into this area of law and into this practice. And I began to realize that what had happened to him was a little bit unfortunate, but also I think we had a strong argument to rebut it. And I'm delighted to say that within about a month of receiving our argument, the VOA overturned their decision, and all the extra council tax that my mentee had paid was refunded. So I took that to be a great victory, and we were very happy and we all celebrated. But then I began to think, how has this affected other people? Because he can't be the first and he won't be the last. And yet I hadn't been affected. So I was conscious that in Stoke, all the properties that I had developed, none of the rooms had been rebanded for council tax. And I began to wonder, why was it that up where he was, up in Wakefield, they were doing this, but it seemed to me that this wasn't happening in Stoke. So very, very, different approaches across England, which again worried me, because it's a bit like saying, well, in Stoke, we're not going to prosecute you if you break the speed limit, but in Wakefield, if you break the speed limit, boy oh boy, we're going to come upon you like a ton of bricks. It seems to me that's not how the law is supposed to be applied. Now, I then started to put out feelers to find out if other people had been affected, and I started to put up posts about it. I was writing some posts about it on social media. I was making other people aware. There was a part of me trying to learn about this and to understand more about the whole situation, the context. But I was also trying to find out how many people were affected, because this would, of course, either strengthen or weaken the argument that I was beginning to formulate, which is that this is basically an incredibly discriminatory approach. Well, quite soon, somebody said to me, "Oh, you need to speak to this guy down in Portsmouth." a guy called Darren Brewer, because his HMOs have been rebanded and he's up in arms about it as well. And he's trying to sort out he's trying to sort this out with the local council. You need to connect with him. So Darren and I had a call, and immediately, there was this sort of, when you meet someone who's kind of on your wavelength, and you've got a connection, and immediately Darren and I had that connection. Both quite sort of feisty people, both interested in politics, both believe in a free market, and we're definitely libertarians. We believe in the power of the market to improve things. We believe in a small state, low taxation, etc. And he was as up in arms as I was about it. But for him, it was actually having a massive impact on his business, because he was having to negotiate how to pay the council tax. Was he going to pass it on to his tenants to pay? Was he going to pay? Not only that, but they had also backdated the date of effective banding. So he had arrears on his account totaling thousands of pounds. So he was in a real pickle, whereas I wasn't. I was in the fortunate position of actually this hadn't personally affected me at all. And I thought, you know what, we could have a really good sort of partnership here fighting this, because while he's actually doing it, he's sort of on the sort of coal face, actually fighting this as a landlord doing it. But I can perhaps stand back and be somebody who could be a supporter to him, but also I've got a bit more time then to do some more of the promotional side of it. So we started talking about formulating some kind of group that could push this forward. And we decided we wanted to do that. And we actually brought on his barrister, Alan Murdy. So Alan had been working with Darren to try and overturn the decision at a local level, but Alan happened to be the UK's, and I'm not exaggerating here, he is the UK's foremost expert on council tax. Wow. He has written 14 volumes of the council tax handbook and has represented hundreds of thousands of people, well, perhaps thousands rather than hundreds of thousands, but certainly many, many, many people at valuation tribunals and in various different tribunals, but local tribunals as well, to fight against the iniquitous application of council tax regulation in many different scenarios. So I bought his book off Amazon. I think I just got a secondhand copy. I think I got the 13th edition. I think it's now in its 14th edition, but I got the 13th edition, and I read the book and I realized this guy was, he just knew council tax upside, downside, backside, front side, and inside out. And we had to have him on our little panel as well. So Alan then joined, and we started to consider what approach we needed to take. And to be honest, Paul, the first few meetings we had, which were all on Zoom, all virtual meetings, we didn't really have much of a structure. None of us had done political campaigning before. None of us really knew, perhaps Alan had probably had the most experience. And we didn't really know exactly how to tackle this. We did know, however, we had a community of people who had either been affected or could be affected by it. So that was the first thing, was getting the message out to our community about what we were doing or what we were trying to do, and seeing if we could gauge support. Were we going to, make people excited and interested in this, or were people going to be fairly nonplussed and a bit complacent? Which reaction were we getting when we put stuff out? The second area that we knew we had to tackle was the media, both specialist property media, but also the wider media. And then the third area was political campaigning. So finding key political allies from whichever party that would support our message and would promote our message within government, because ultimately that's what we needed to change, was the law. So we very kind of loosely and tentatively started to plot out some ideas. And Then we found other people were wanting to join us. So a guy called John McClellan joined, and I had a few phone calls with him to try and help him. And he had an HMO up in the north as well that had been rebanded. But he's great at technology, so he helped set up our Google Shared Drive, minutes of meetings, actions, that kind of thing. We had somebody else who came from Platinum Property Partners, who came and offered their help as an admin advisor and support person. We had Matt Baker come along. He does his own training and mentoring as well. And his HMO had been rebanded in Warrington. So he came along as well, and he could share it with his community. Then we had Neil Chadder from the HMO group, and Nevo Living came into the group. And we developed this committee of people who had their own strengths in different areas. And together we kind of rather... what I say is in a rather sort of unstructured way, we started to talk, we started to debate it. And what we found seemed to work was and I suggested this to the group, that if we can include the landlord community in this, if we can spread what we're doing far and wide in terms of the knowledge about this, we will probably get some people who've got good connections. We'll probably find people who've got, they say, don't they, you're 9 steps away from everybody in the world, or 9
something
connections
like that.
away, something like that, 7, I can't remember how many it is. But I thought there's going to be somebody who knows somebody who's the editor of Newsnight, or who works on the Today programme, or who is somebody in government. And slowly but surely we were able to start doing, we started to run webinars for the community to explain what we were trying to do, why we were trying to do this, and what was happening, and how to deal with it if you've been affected. And Paul, we had hundreds of people messaging us. I cannot tell you, I have got thousands of emails that I've sort of filtered away in my inbox. People who were affected. Awful stories, terrible stories of landlords who've either given up their business, who have been on antidepressants. People, I mean, we heard some absolutely heart-rending stories of people who have suffered terribly because of this practice by the Valuation Office Agency. Tenants as well, tenants where they've been handed the bill, from the local council, your room has now been rebanded, but unfortunately not just rebanded from this month, but you've now got 2 years worth of arrears to pay, and it's going to be £10,000. People who are they were oblivious to this ever being a possibility, and suddenly this huge amount of money is being required from them. And of course they're scared, they don't know where to turn, they don't know the law. So we started offering some advice sessions. Alan became quite busy, I became quite busy. I offered another sort of form of advice, explaining I'm not a legal professional, I'm not registered with the Law Society, but given the I suppose the successful case that I had, I certainly felt that I could offer some advice and support. And so together we started to kind of coordinate some activity. What was incredibly helpful was Darren's contacts with Penny Mordaunt, who is his MP, and some of the other contacts. So for example, John McClellan happened to be living in Michael Gove's constituency. Now that is incredibly helpful, Paul. If you want to run a political campaign, find a constituent of the minister whose department you want to be making the change, because I'm sure that had an impact. Even though we haven't kind of heard that directly, I'm pretty sure the fact that John was hassling Michael Gove, writing to Michael Gove, making Michael Gove aware of his case. He had a surgery with Michael Gove. Michael Gove would have known what was happening. Now, none of us had Lee Rowley was actually the housing minister who made this happen. On the instrument that you've read out, the order, you'll see it's his Lee Rowley's signature at the end. But last year at the Conservative Party conference, Darren and I attended to really have a sort of pincer grip movement of the housing team, and we met Lee Rowley. And I think he'd only just become housing minister that week. So he was kind of new in the job. And we went at him, hammer and tongs. What are you going to do about council tax and HMOs? And I think, oh no. Who are you two mad pair? Who let you in? We also started to do more lobbying with the NRLA, and they were very interested and excited by our campaign. And we got a lot of positive vibes from them, and they put out some communications about it as well, and certainly would you know, they fed back to us every time they heard anything from government, what was going on. And we just started to make our voice heard. We used social media quite well. We had the Facebook group. We set up our website, and I think all of us were just trying to do our bit. And then last December, we suddenly heard that an announcement was going to be made in the Commons. So this was about a year after we had formed our committee. We'd been doing some political lobbying. We've gone out to the media to limited success. I think because it's such a technical area, a lot of media just discounted all our press releases, and they weren't interested. I actually also think some of the property media may have felt rather jaded because, you know, as you said earlier, the last 10 years for landlords have been a very tricky landscape to navigate from a legislative point of view. We've had one thing after another, after another, after another, you know, starting with Section 24. That was probably the biggest change that the government introduced. But then you're right, we then had, you know, this threat of EPCCs. We then had additional licensing on HMOs. We then had the increase in Article 4 areas. You know, if you invest in HMOs, if you don't like dealing with pieces of legislation, well, you're in the wrong job.
Yeah.
Because it's all about that these days. It's all about understanding that.
And then I suppose just to add to that list, you also have the wider economic impacts of increased interest rates, you know, effectively people's mortgage rates doubling, you know, when they're coming off their product onto a new product. And then, of course, the impact of energy. You know, energy has just been absolutely astonishing. And if you're providing that as part of your service to add value to your offering, then that creates headaches as well.
It does. So we were kind of speaking into a market where people were already feeling pretty negative, and as you say, they had headaches. And I think the property, the sort of specialist property media were also feeling that. They were feeling this kind of like, oh yeah, well, good luck, Wendy, good luck, Darren, you know, we wish you all the best, we you know, well done, we hope you do it, but oh, it's very unlikely. These things have been tried before, and you know, you'll never do it. You'll never do it.
And in fairness, to offer some balance, I suppose it's. Do you remember when Section 24, the abolition of the just bizarre decision to get rid of tax relief on interest payments, the most novel and strange decision ever made by government in terms of how to treat the accounts of a business? But putting that to one side, at the time, you know, we'll remember that a narrative was born that, don't worry, this will be repealed, this isn't going to happen, and alas, it didn't. And so I think landlords were a bit jaded having had that as the consequence. But if we throw that into stark contrast now, whilst that campaign was unsuccessful, yours has been successful. So with this jaded audience that you were attempting to engage, how did you romp home to victory?
Well, come December, we then found out that the Henna Davison, who was a minister in the department, who's still a minister, but she's actually retiring or leaving Parliament next year, she announced that there was going to be a consultation. So the government ran a consultation early in 2023 for 12 weeks and asked people their views on HMOs. And we felt that was a very significant moment because we'd had a letter from Michael Gove to say that HMOs should only be treated as one property for the purposes of council tax, and unless in exceptional circumstances. We didn't know what that meant, but we were prepared to, progress with the consultation. So we advised people about how to respond to the consultation, and we promoted it far and wide, and waited and waited and waited and waited. And in the summer, this is the other thing, is that we had written a number of templates for our community to be able to send off to their local MP, because it can be a bit daunting if you've never written to your MP before. You don't quite know maybe how to structure it or what to say. So Alan wrote a couple of templates, I wrote a couple of templates, and the community were brilliant at sending these and telling us when they'd done it. And we found that we had quite a number of MPs across government, the cross-party MPs, who supported our campaign, which was fantastic. So, cut a long story short, we over the summer we started to put pressure on again, because we hadn't heard about the outcome of the consultation. And then Darren found out, I think either through Caroline Dinage or through Penny Mordaunt, that an announcement was imminent. The announcement was suddenly overtaken by what had happened with Hamas and their invasion of Israel, and their atrocities there. And so suddenly the announcement was off again, and we were waiting, and then all of a sudden we found out, just literally a week ago on Friday, completely out of the blue, we had no warning about it whatsoever, that the government were effectively stopping the ability of the VOA to reband HMO rooms from council tax, and it was going to happen before the 1st of December, or on the 1st of December it would be enacted. And it was like, wow, this has happened. We've done it. One of the things that I think helped, Alan had written a legal amendment to the 1992 Local Government Finance Act, which it's all high level legal speak. But if you're changing legislation, you have to write it in such a way that it is going to work. You need someone, you'll understand this, Paul, from your legal background, that the way that you phrase certain sentences, the legal vocabulary needed, you need an expert to be able to write these amendments. And Alan, of course, had that expertise. So when we had managed to sort of clarify exactly what we were looking for, which is that non-self-contained rooms, and what we meant by that was, if it didn't have all the 4 tests of self-containment, which was eating, sleeping, washing and cooking, if it didn't have all 4 of those, it wasn't deemed to be self-contained. And if it was part of an HMO, so either it had a license or it met the qualification for being an HMO, then that room should not have council tax applied. And Alan wrote it in a beautiful amendment. And actually, when we sent that into the department for levelling up, they accepted it. They said, yes, our legal team has looked at it, and if this does get if the 1992 Act does get amended, we will use your amendment. Now, again, that was a massive kind of moment, because I think we kind of thought, oh, yes, Alan, you're the man. You know how to write legislation. We'll keep you on, because the rest of us would have had absolutely no idea how to write it, properly. But it was great. And again, I think that gave us a bit of kudos, because I think that the department for levelling up, who we were by then beginning to engage with a bit more, and we had some more communications with them, they were beginning to see us as a serious group who had some expertise, some knowledge. We had a bit of gravitas. We had a bit of say-so. We weren't just some sort of woolly kind of group of disconcerted landlords. We actually had some brain power as well, which I don't think they were expecting. Anyway, and then we found out literally last week, we found the actual instrument, the order, which was written out, signed by Lee Rowley, and it will go into legislation from the 1st of December. And yeah, it suddenly, boom, 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 all these things happened very, very quickly in the end, and it's happened. And yeah, boom, open that champagne.
And so what this means in real terms is that's it now, doesn't it? I mean, I've read the statutory instrument. You've explained it very, very well. And obviously there's been some shrewd, and wise drafting done in the background of all of this. So it's absolutely set in stone, subject to some things we'll discuss in a minute, that we can't have individual non-self-contained HMOs subject to council tax anymore going forwards. So that's
Correct.
a huge victory, isn't it? Just an absolutely
It
huge
is.
victory.
It
And
is.
you've alluded to some of these things, but I think it's useful to sort of spell it out. I mean, there's been a huge, terrible human cost of this, the application of this legislation. I mean, including lots, very tragically, loss of life. There was a landlord in the Northwest who took his own life as a result of this, and you know, what a terrible tragedy. I mean, it's just unthinkable, isn't it?
It is. The suffering that people have gone through unnecessarily has been horrendous, Paul. Yeah.
And what the frustrations which have been expressed to me at my breakfast meeting have been that it's the inconsistency that was the worst thing. Actually, the pure imposition of the council tax was horrendous for lots of reasons, which we can discuss in a minute. But what was worse than that was then the fact that it was very, very inconsistent. So you could speak to investors all over the UK, and even in their locality, as you alluded to, very different approaches were taken. You know, and some people began to say, well, it's if you apply for planning, contact the VOA, and it's that triggers it. But nobody really had a clear landscape. And just as you've said, you know, on a street with 5 HMOs on it, it could be that 3 of them are banded and 2 of them are not. And you'd think that'd come as some comfort to the landlords who haven't been banded. But it's exactly the opposite. They're now sat there saying, what on earth am I to do? Because they've heard also horror stories from elsewhere in the country of retrospective arrears being claimed for landlords, you know, in the order of tens and £20,000, which in most cases is the road to insolvency for that particular landlord. You know, they're just not going to have the stomach for it. I mean, we had it in one of our projects, and one of the biggest hurdles was the communication with the client tenants. You know, we had to go back to these tenants who were completely happy and to say, you know, just so you know, this has happened. And they were absolutely livid. They were absolutely livid because they were saying, well, look, we don't blame you. You know, you've been really clear with us, and we've read the contract. We know what's going on, but we can't believe the council in their wisdom have decided that as HMO tenants, we need to now bear the burden of additional council tax.
And particularly because in their contract, it might have been that it said all inclusive, and they were actually expecting you to pay the council tax. So this is where a lot of landlords have found that they have been, you know, they've had their foot in both camps. They realised that you know, they've got this contract with the tenants which says I'll pay the council tax, but suddenly they've got 6 times the amount of council tax to pay per month, and they're going to effectively become bankrupt if they do pay it. So what do they do?
And even if they do, which of course, you know, they will seek to comply with the legislation, the feedback that we were getting through the meetings as well was that the logistical nightmare was just off the charts. So a landlord might say, well, look, fine, I'll take this on the chin, I'll pay the council tax. And then they mention that to the council tax office, and the message comes back, it's not as simple as that. So we need to know who all these tenants are. We need all of their tenancies. We need to know all of the change of tenancies. If you're dealing with a 6, 10, 12 bed plus property, I mean, that you're beginning to make a full-time job for somebody just dealing with council tax. And then you know, some people won't hang around for that, will they? They'll dispose of properties and all the rest of it. But the victory is that you guys have got this multi-talented, multi-skilled team together who've actually been able to make some progress. And what was really fascinating is, you know, this wasn't a legal challenge. This was a political challenge, you know, done by consultation, which is clearly the right route. Because one of the great problems with, let's say, if this was like a judicial review action, you might get the right decision for you. Yes, something has been it's not been applied fairly, things have been included that shouldn't have been included. But one of the dangers of those kind of challenges is the court just then sends it back to the person making the decision and says, you need to go and make this decision again. Of course, at which time they've been carefully briefed by their lawyers, and they make the same decision again, but they make it in inverted for the right reasons. The absolute beauty of the approach that you've taken, which is very, very smart, is you've done it by way of consultation. So this isn't a legal challenge. This is not a legal judgment that can be overturned or challenged, or the council, you know, the VOA can take
appeal.
and
Yeah.
appeal, or make the same decision, but as I say, in brackets, for the right reasons. This is an actual change of legislation that you've managed to achieve, which is absolutely fantastic. So congratulations again. But there'll be lots and lots of questions. So there'll be lots and lots of people who will be very, very excited about this. And then the questions will start popping up in their mind. I know that was my experience. You know, I saw this and I sent you a message straight away saying, Wendy, this is the best thing that's ever happened in the last 10 years in property, as far as I can tell. But then questions come to mind, don't they? So, and maybe this isn't the forum to deal with those questions, but I suppose let me ask the one that's top of my mind. So if a landlady has been banded, and let's say this process has been 2 years of council tax, will that landlady or landlord be able to recover the additional council tax they've paid? How's that going to be dealt with in the legislation?
Well, let's just say backdated arrears or backdated bills or backdated, dues are being dealt with.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can't say more at this point than that.
Okay, cool.
But what I can say is that the department knows there is a second piece of work to do for all the people who have had this affect them and their HMO, whether it's tenants or landlords, and significant bills have been paid. In some cases, Paul, you're absolutely right that for some people they have been landed with 20 or 30,000 pounds worth of backdated arrears,
Mm-hmm.
and they have paid it.
Mm-hmm.
And now that that has been overturned, or rather now that they can, their HMO will probably automatically be rebanded back as one property. Of course, it might be a band D rather than a band A. However, I think for most landlords, even if they were to see an increase in the overall single property banding, they still wouldn't argue about that, because, as you say, it's not just the financial nightmare of dealing with this, it's the logistical and admin nightmare of dealing with it, which is as much a big headache as the finances. But I think that what will happen is, prior to the 1st of December, so let's say your property was rebanded 1st of January of this year, there's definitely some work going on behind the scenes to find out whether A, any refunds can take place, B, any arrears can be written off, C, there is another, of course, rather tactical question to answer, where, let's say, for example, a landlord has his property rebanded, and he then discounted the rent for the tenants because he was conscious that they were going to now have to pay council tax. So let's say for the last 2 years, he has had to charge discounted rents to take account of council tax being paid by the tenants, and the tenants are now possibly going to receive a rebate. Well, hang on, shouldn't the landlord get that rebate, because he's the one, or she's the one, who has discounted their rent to take account of the council tax? So there are some of these rather kind of intricate, what I call flowchart problems. And actually, on Monday the 20th of November, we are running a webinar to help people to think through what their options are and what they need to consider. And hopefully by then we might have some guidance from the department as well about what they're going to do and what they're going to suggest will be done, because we've dealt with the valuation office agency problem. If you like, the strategic problem was dealing with the VOA who were rebanding. The VOA never collected the tax. The VOA doesn't have a revenues team that collects the council tax. The VOA is a department of HMRC. You'll be surprised to hear that. And that department is there basically to say, you owe us tax. We're not going to collect it. We're going to now let your local council collect it. So we're now, though, we've dealt with that in the legislation. That's all, cleared up. But now what we've got to deal with is the issue of local council taxation as a result of this change. And that is really where the ball of wool starts. And we've got to find how we can pull out the string and straighten it out.
Yep.
We've got some tentatively very, very hopeful signs. I cannot say more than that, though I am bound to secrecy for the time being. But all I can say is, don't lose hope. Because just as I kept saying to people, don't lose hope about this fight and our campaign and our potential win, and we did win it, I think there is going to be some more good news on the horizon for landlords who have either paid council tax, or have they got a council tax arrears, or they are struggling. I mean, I know of about 6 cases at the moment that are due to go to the VTE tribunal in the next few weeks. And we have written to the VTE to say, why are we still going ahead with this tribunal when the law has been changed? Oh, well, because you're still part of the process and you still need to turn up to the tribunal and make your appeal. And I'm saying these appeals are null and void now, because these cases should just simply be dismissed. But the VTE is saying, no, we still need to go through the process. Well, when we turn up at those tribunals, we'll see whether the judge has had a rethink at that point, because I suspect they might go, there's absolutely no point wasting people's time having this appeal when we don't need to have the appeal because the law has been changed. So I do think there are some, there's some initial procedural questions that we need to get answered, and there are also some questions about backdated council tax, which again we haven't got answers yet, but I think in time, Paul, it will some people are going to have some very nice checks in the post.
Wow, that's lovely to hear. You don't hear that very often. So if we direct people to HMO and counciltax.co.uk/get involved, if somebody populates their details in there, will they automatically get notified of the webinar that you've just mentioned?
Yes, they will. They'll automatically get notified. They get a welcome email, and then they are on our list. So they will get notice that we haven't sent the invitations out yet. That's my job actually to do tonight. We put it on our Facebook group. If you can join our Facebook group as well. That's obviously more dynamic because people are putting posts on every day. And that's HMOs and council tax. Yeah, that's a Facebook group, HMOs and council tax. And you'll see our logo at the top of it, and you'll get a welcome message when you join, and an introduction to who we are. And if people have got questions, they can either put them on the Facebook group. One of us does try to jump in every couple of days to answer them. As you can probably imagine, I mean, even today, I've had 3 calls about this whole matter. So it's still very busy for all of us trying to make sure that we communicate with people and answer their questions, but we will do our very, very best. And yes, if you sign up on our page, then definitely on our website, I should say, sign up on the website, and then you will get notification of the webinars.
Perfect. So we'll put that in the show notes. People can do that. Do you think this means a new council tax band will be introduced for HMOs, or is it too early to say that?
I doubt it. I certainly doubt. I doubt it before the next general election. It wasn't in. There's been no murmur of that anywhere. To be honest, I think the government knows that council tax is a right old mess anyway. This is one, as I say, microcosmic issue in the whole big world of council tax. And I mean, Alan has said publicly that he thinks this could be the sort of domino that starts the whole domino wall falling down on council tax, and for the government to rethink the whole process of council tax. For example, properties are still valued on the basis of what they would have been worth in 1991. I mean, that's such a long time ago. It's over 30 years ago, and we're still trying to sort of extrapolate the values of property back 30 years. And there was supposed to have been a revaluation exercise done about 10 years ago, and it basically got halted because it was deemed to be impossible. Maybe with AI now, maybe that's something else that would be possible again. Although if you listen to Alexa, when I say to her, can you put on the news, Alexa, she doesn't know what I'm talking about. So I cannot see AI taking over the world just yet, Paul.
Just yet. No, maybe not. Well, hopefully not. And great. So that's what we'll do, is we'll point people towards that link, and, for them to get involved, give their details, because I think obviously the devil is in the detail now, isn't it? And I think people do need to follow up with this and understand exactly what their position is. Like I think we've got the glorious victory, or you rather have got the glorious victory. It's then about like the practical application of it is, and there's going to be some very interesting consequences. So, for example, on the face of valuation. So I've come across HMOs which have had basically 2 valuations given to them and said, look, if you didn't have this council tax issue, this is the valuation I'd give you. but because you've got the council tax issue, I'm afraid I'm giving you valuation B. So what's going to be fascinating is those people are going to be able to, in due course, when they go back for further lending, perhaps potentially get significantly better valuations, because the calculation will be run differently. And that's much needed, particularly in this part of the cycle, isn't it? You know, valuations are a challenge anyway. Anything that gives you a bit of a fairer wind on those has got to be a good thing, hasn't it? So that's fantastic. And obviously,
yeah, that's very interesting. Again, that's something I suppose personally I haven't come across because my properties haven't been rebanded, but I can see that, and I haven't actually heard of that before. So I think you're right. There's going to be lots of these kind of consequential matters that will arise that we'll go, oh yes, of course we didn't think about that. Oh yes, that's going to be a consequence. I think this is why we want to start to think these things through, to give some people advice. Obviously Alan will be part of that, and with his legal training and background, he'll be able to advise and help people. What I do know is that this apparently is going to happen automatically, that you will not, we believe that you would have to make a proposal to the Valuation Office Agency to have your property re-aggregated, which is the sort of technical term, into one property for council tax purposes. But we believe that isn't going to happen, that you won't have to do that. But actually the local councils are going to be asked to do a full audit of their license, particularly this is to do with licensed HMOs. So non-licensed ones, you probably will have to make a proposal for. But for licensed HMOs, they're going to go through the whole list and find out which of these have been rebanded and automatically put them back on one banding. So you will have to do nothing about it, and it will automatically revert to the 1st of December 2023.
Okay, fantastic. Well, look, I think the key step is to click the get involved link, put your details in, and follow this process right to the end, because there's going to be, no doubt, lots of twists and turns as we go. Now, you've alluded to some people on the podcast so far, but I think give you the opportunity. Are there any particular thank yous of the core team that you've been working with you want to just put out there in the last final moments of the podcast?
Yeah, well, I obviously want to thank the HMO Council Tax Reform Group committee and all the people on our Facebook group, people who have joined in, people who've been on our webinars, people who've donated. We've had over £5,000 worth of donations to the cause, but especially Alan Murdy, Darren Brewer, Matt Baker, Neil Chadder, John McClelland, and there's other people as well in the background. Platinum Property Partners been immensely helpful in promoting what we've been doing. The NRLA have also helped us with our campaign, and I suppose ultimately I also have to thank Michael Gove. If there's one thing that he may have done right in his years as Secretary of State for Housing, it's this. Michael. Also Penny Mordaunt, who's been fantastic. We couldn't have done this without Penny. Caroline Dinage as well has been a great supporter. She proposed the bill first of all last year in the Commons, and we've also had other Tim Farron has been incredibly supportive, and other MPs cross party. So it wouldn't be right for me not to thank them, and to thank the department for levelling up housing and local communities for seeing sense and passing this through into legislation.
And that is wonderful. So a big thank you to all of those people, and particularly to you, Wendy, for leading this charge. As I say, you're a busy woman at the best of times. So where you found the time to take on yet another challenge, I do not know. So where do we go from here? Thank you very much for coming on the podcast, Wendy. It's been an absolute pleasure to catch up. And as I say, this very special podcast to acknowledge all of your work and the work of your team as well. You're actually joining us at the next Property Investor Breakfast this week. I'm not going to say much more than that because it's completely full, so there's no point anybody trying to get a place. But we as a community also want to thank you, because it's easy not to do, isn't it? But you are the one who's done the hard graft. So you're coming as our guest, and we're really looking forward to thanking you in person for what is just a remarkable achievement. And as I say, for me, I think what is this the beginning of a more positive future for the private rental sector, for renters as much as for landlords, with positive developments like this? Is it? I really sincerely hope so. Look, Wendy, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Paul.
There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. So I'll put in the links. I'll put links to Wendy, and I'll put the getting involved link in there. And please do join me at another property and investor breakfast. So the next one, believe it or not, is actually in January now. So you're going to have to wait until the new year. But January 5th of January, the Discovery Day. It's when we work on our goals and our vision. And I'll do some crystal ball gazing, and I'll make some predictions for you for 2024. And we'll also introduce the lovely Wendy back on for a more economics-based macro view podcast in the first quarter of 2024. That'll be a lot of fun. Thank you very much for listening to the podcast. Please do share this. Let's get this great news out to the community, because obviously it's some of the best news we've heard in a long time. And thank you very much for listening.